joined by Cathy White, who's the founder of CEW Communications, and we're going to be talking about events. So Cathy, obviously CEW Communications, you offer events as a service, but you've got a long history of events. Do you want to tell the guys a little bit about your background?
Yeah, of course. So my background's always been PR, but part of PR has always been events to varying different degrees. So whether that's a self-owned event where you have full ownership of the content, you're positioning yourself as a thought leader, whether that's how you're going to be seen at a massive, massive conference, or whether it's just, hosting like a dinner and a get-together for journalists. Events has always been kind of part and parcel of doing PR. Now, separate to my PR career, I'm one of the directors of Geek Girl Meetup UK. And Geek Girl Meetup UK is great for not being anything like my normal day job, because we have full and utter ownership and decision-making power over the events that we do. And those events are specifically to empower women in technology. So we get female role models up on stage to share their expertise to a mixed audience of men and women on various different themes on a monthly basis. And we also run an annual conference, which is usually around 200 people. So the two kind of degrees of working with a company and helping them, supporting them on their events, and then actually taking ownership of something and making it fun and our own means that I've actually gained quite a bit of event experience over the years.
And so for you, what's the best part of organising an event?
So I get really geeky about content. So for me, I love coming up with a theme or a topic of conversation and finding people that can come along and speak on that. Now with Geek Girl, it means we can be quite selfish because ultimately we all find something that we really love and we really want to find amazing speakers on. And for my clients, that normally means working with them to come up with something very specific and then curating that content for them. And the reason I love that so much is that with events, the most successful ones are the ones that are the least promotional. If you do an event which is solely about talking about what you do or your product or your service, it's a bit yawn, it's a bit boring. But if you can come up with something that's genuinely interesting to your community and then you mention what you do a little bit, it's very effective.
And what do you find the most challenging sort of aspect of organising events?
The big thing is always getting people in the room. It is. So I work in London, and with London, the number of events that you can go to on a daily basis, you would never have to buy food again. You'd never have to buy alcohol again. There's so much choice out there that you've got to make sure that you compete well, you provide some content that someone is genuinely going to be interested to come along and see, and you do it at the right time, because there are so many different factors that can pull away from the event of a success, from the success of an event.
And for you, what would you say makes a real wow event? What's the wow factor for you?
The wow factor for me is giving something that people do not expect. Now, most events have almost kind of like a standard format. So people will arrive, whether it's breakfast or dinner or lunchtime, there will be food, there'll be a bit of schmoozing, there'll be some drinks. Then there'll usually be like an hour and a half of content. Come up with something that makes you unique. So whether it's the gift bag that they leave with, if you provide a gift bag, whether it's the food itself, have a story that kind of brings your entire event together and shows your brand in the best light. Those are the ones that are remembered.
Gift bags is an interesting one. I know that people worry about approaching companies to put stuff in gift bags. Have you got any tips on how you approach someone sort of for freebies?
Yeah, I think the general thing is if you don't ask, you won't get. So don't be afraid. If you're running your own company, you are naturally a hustler, or you should be a bit of a hustler anyway. So don't be afraid to email people to explain what the benefit of doing that is. So X number of people are going to be there in the room. Highlight that there'll be a call to action with the gift bag. So if you do provide a gift bag and you're getting freebies, have a hashtag on the gift bag. Try and actually make it so that people want to share what they got from the event. So create stuff that instinctively makes people want to kind of generate their own content. And for the people on the other side, the partners, the people that you bring on board, you've got to think about what they want as a business. So that all comes down to the amount of promotion that they're going to get versus the cost of giving it. So share it on your social networks, mention their company as a supplier or partner on your Eventbrite or wherever you've listed the event, and shout out about them at the event as well and invite them to be a part of it.
So if anyone's watching this and they're just stressing out thinking, I've never organised an event before, I know I want to sort out and launch an event for my company, for example, how would you sort of recommend they get started? Have you got any top tips for just taking those first steps and sort of starting to plan everything?
Give yourself as much time as possible and start small. So I know a lot of people that go in for like a really, really big launch party, but what you end up doing is you create more work for yourself and way too much stress for what should be a really happy moment for you and a business. So think small, and then make it look big. So events are all very deceptive. There'll be people in the room that know how many people actually turned up, but camera positioning, the amount of social media reach that you get, this can all suggest that the event or the launch was much bigger than it actually was. So, and really think about the quality of people that you invite to be a part of that. So if, for instance, it's a launch, you might not necessarily want 500 random people from the general public there, unless that's really relevant to your business. Think about having your investors, thinking about having anyone that's helped you on your journey, your family members, people that are genuinely going to share your success with you.
Did you have a launch event for your company?
No, I still haven't. It's one of those things that for me it's on the list. So I'm debating it at the moment. But the thing that I would much rather do is actually have a thank you dinner, and just have 12 people around the table and have a conversation.
And I think that's the thing, isn't it? That a launch event is not necessary depending on what you're doing. And actually, when you're first starting out, you need to keep the purse strings tight. Money can get quite tight. In terms of budget, if someone is planning something, they've decided, I really do need to run an event. Have you got any tips of budgeting when it comes to events? Anything that keeps costs down?
So I think the first thing to do is roughly figure out how much you would spend per head. In the kind of the startup world in London, you can normally get a venue for free. So you can keep costs relatively low. But the thing that always makes things more expensive is catering and alcohol. So figure out roughly what you could happily spend per head, per person, and then try and find something that fits that budget. There are lots of websites now that you can use in order to do that. Go on Google and search catering supplier and you'll find a whole bunch of suggestions. Keep the cost low. It doesn't have to be expensive. Ask people for help. Genuinely ask a lot of people for help because people will be willing to, and try and list it in as many places as possible that are free to list if you want to get more people outside of your general network.
So you mentioned free venues. How do you get a free venue?
If you don't ask, you don't get.
I'm seeing a trend here.
Yeah, so with Geek Girl, because we're a not-for-profit, we're in a very great position in that we can ask. And we usually do get, because the thing that we're doing is instinctively a good thing and people want to be a part of that. But a lot of London is now covered in co-working spaces, and most co-working spaces have event spaces because that's kind of the differentiator, competitor type thing. Those co-working spaces are usually free. So as long as you find a date that works within their calendar, it's also a date that you can invite their members along to. That's usually a kind of quid pro quo approach. You can kind of go down that way. Now there is a cap with those. There are some spaces that will easily take 50 people, and then there's some all the way up to 180. And then after that point, you're looking at paid venues.
That's great. That's great to know. And I suppose it does make sense, particularly with the co-working spaces, particularly if you're working with potential entrepreneurs who may then actually say, oh, this building's great. I would love to come and work here. Brilliant. If you can get them extra clients and you're just using a room that is just sitting there otherwise.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Right, so if anyone is particularly stressing out about their event, have you got any stress-free tips? How can you stress less about the event that you're running?
I think the best thing that I've ever seen with event organisers is they are organised. And you may be stressing and worry about the organisation side of things, but have a list. Just go through the list and just tick off where you are with everything and breathe. Events are never without their problems. There is always something that comes up. I've had experiences in the past where, you'll have 100 people sign up to the event and 12 turn up and you're like, what the hell happened? And it's stuff that's outside of your control. So in this particular instance, the DLR was down and that was the only way to get to the event venue unless you were going in an Uber. That I can't control that. That's TfL's problem and sadly it's now mine. Always write a list in terms of the advance of the event and always have a schedule on the event. Know who needs to be where, doing what, at what time, and make sure everyone is well briefed. The things that normally crop up on the day are human errors, so try and find a way to avoid them as much as possible.
And I think it's interesting, isn't it? I think one of the things that I quite often hear said, and you've touched on it a couple of times, always underestimate how many people are going to come. So, if 100 people RSVP saying yes, that is not going to be 100 bodies in the room. That is probably more likely to be 75 in the room. And you sort of, as the more events you do, the more you'll learn what that natural attrition rate is to what you're doing. And I guess one thing to remember too is that once you've got that list and you know what the perfect day looks like, what the ideal event looks like, no one else knows what that ideal event looks like. And so it's like a wedding, isn't it? When the amount of times when you speak to a bride and you say, how was your day? And they're like, yeah, but this one thing didn't happen. It's like, well, no one knew that was going to happen. So as far as everyone else is concerned, everything's gone perfectly. So just bear that in mind. If there's some small hiccup, something doesn't go to plan, who else knows that plan? And as you were saying, even if something goes disastrously wrong on the day, that's only the people who were there will remember that. So there's a lot to be said in this day and age for cameras, for filming, for that record of the day that can be definitely skewed to make it look slightly different. So camera angles can make a room look a lot fuller than it is. Yeah. As long as you've got happy people who still have enjoyed their time, no one remembers the numbers a few weeks later.
Yeah, I think the big thing, just to touch on what you just said on the no one else knows, you will give it away if you look stressed at your own event. So don't worry and don't run around going, oh, like this didn't happen. Because the minute you do that, people know something's wrong and you give them a negative image of what's going on. The best hosts are always lovely. And you remember good hosts. So if you're running an event and you're doing it as a launch, you are the host. So play the hostess, don't play the event organizer. And
it's that idea of you become your brand, don't you? Particularly when you are a startup and you're doing this on your own, you are the face of your brand. It's almost like that idea of, is it swans or ducks? Swans that are meant to be serene on the surface and then like all the frantic pedaling happens underneath. It's all in your head. Yeah. Don't let anyone else see that. If need be, go and have a staff room where you can go and freak out away from the public eye. I think one of the worst things I've ever seen at an event was someone properly freaking out at their event, and it became almost a spectacle. Someone having a go at a staff member that did not need to happen in the room with the guests. It's just take it outside, go and have your meltdown outside, come back in the room looking like a swan.
Exactly. And the thing is, you've got to be agile with events. There will always be something that goes wrong, whether it's a technical fault, which I've seen so many times, or someone doesn't turn up until 2 minutes before they're meant to be on a panel, and then you have to kind of hustle them through, get them on stage, make sure they're comfortable, and then leave. You can't be in control of everything, but what you have to do is be able to just get around it, because you will get thrown problem after problem after problem, but you can make it work.
It's dealing with other people, isn't it?
Exactly.
And when it comes down to it, as long as you're on top of the stuff that you're going to do, and then you deal in it calmly with the sort of the unknown factors, then you're doing great. Thank you so much for taking time to talk to us, Cathy.
No,
You're an absolute star.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome.